Welcome back. Today I want to talk about the MEMT R1 earbuds, which are these black guys. These came from the Friendly Audio store on AliExpress. You can see they're about $16 there today on AliExpress. And again, thank you to the Friendly Audio store for shipping those out. They actually shipped them out together with these beautiful T6s, which are the strawberry pair. It took a little bit of willpower to not just open these and start listening to these right away, but I promise you I will get to the strawberries here shortly. So a little while back, I talked about the MEMT R1, which was their first IEM, I believe, and it fell into this sort of trending category of neutral bright IEMs, which tend to have a very neutral bass, a very light bass, kind of a just enough bass, and it really focuses on the mids and the upper mids, female vocals, that kind of range. Some people very much like that tuning. People who like a lot of bass aren't really going to be fans of that tuning, but I just wanted to point out that this is becoming a little bit of their house sound of this neutral bright, and when we get into the R7, it very much follows on what I found with the R1. It just comes off slightly different in an earbud style than it would an IEM style. So this is the R7, and it's quite nice. I mean, first it comes in this nice packaging, which you don't see too often, and it comes with a nice case, bag, whatever you want to call it. MEMT, my earphone, my time, for those who want to know what that stood for. So the shells are actually, they call them CNC. They are metal. There's a little magnet so they will stick together, a little knurling on the side and on there. So quite nice. The physical package is actually quite nice. The cable is wrapped, so it's not straight up. You can see what it is underneath. It's kind of just that rubbery wire, but they do wrap it in some kind of nylon. I believe this is just the play pause button, or no, this actually is the phone button with no controls. So you can answer calls, but you can't control volume, or maybe it does play pause, but single button mic. And there's a little R7 logo, and it comes with this attractive leather wrap to keep it all nice and tidy. So as I mentioned with the R1, it has this neutral bright tuning, and if you're a fan of the Vitos, which have this very likable, bassy sound, it reminds me quite a lot of just like your generic budget IEM V-shaped sound. It's just got a very likable, bassy sound with enough vocals to keep you, entertained and engaged. So with the R1 and this R7, you end up with this neutral bright tuning, which it really takes the bass level of say, the Vito, and it cuts it by quite a bit. So I call it just enough bass. It's for people who don't have, a real interest in hearing a heavy bass. It's just enough so you don't miss it. So think of it as a flat bass response or a light bass response, or bass light. It's in that. If your music preferences tend to have a lot of bass-driven songs, probably stick with the Vito. For people who don't really care too much about bass and care more about vocals and upper mids, this one is very much in your preference. So you take this bass response, which is very light. So on the R1, when you listen to the R1, they call it neutral bright, and for me, it ends up being more bright. But what happens on an earbud, when they have this earlier roll-off right after the upper mids and the treble, it's not nearly as bright. So you end up with this, you can almost call it brighter vocals, but it's a sharper vocal. And it is a little more bright, but it's not nearly as bright as the IEM version of this tuning. It's just enough to add a little shine to the vocals. The guitars and the drums and everything that has just a little bit of a sharp high-end attack to it just sounds a little better, because it doesn't get sort of this darker Vito sound. This is for people who prefer that upper sound, and it's really hard to equate the two. They're not, one isn't better than the other one. They're just two different preferences. And some people will prefer a bassier sound, and some people say, well, I don't really care too much about the bass. I just want to hear detailed vocals. And that's where these sharper vocals come in, because it's not, you don't have this big bass sound behind the vocals. The bass is very much below the vocals, and you end up with this clarity around the midsection, which is just really nice. And once you get used to it, or if you're used to it already, it's really nice, and it's done really well on the R7, surprisingly well. And I actually like the R7 more than I like the R1, because the R1 is just too bright for me. But in this version, it's really quite nice. And for me, I sort of hit it on this classic rock. I have a block in my playlist that's classic rock, and so Dire Straits, Money for Nothing, Sailing, Toto by Africa. Those songs sort of hit right at this easygoing, kind of mid-centric sound that just sounds really well. If there's too much bass-driven music in your playlist, probably not going to be a fan of this one. But anything from the mids and above, really nice. So that would be my focus. If you're a bass fan, stick with your Vitos. If you're looking for a nice complement to a bassier sound, the R7 is kind of up there with a nicer build. So I don't really have any complaints about it. It's, especially once you burn it in for a little, right out of the box, it was a little grainy. And so as I said, the vocals especially have a sharpness to them. And right out of the box, they sounded a little grainy, not as smooth as they should. And then after a little bit, it'll actually work itself out. And you end up with just a nice detailed midsection, upper midsection, very much the focus on this one. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.